This episode was recorded with a beloved professor, Dr. Pam Perry, in November 2024, with plans to be published in the spring semester 2025. Sadly, we learned that Dr. Pam Perry passed away the past 4th of February of this year. However, we didn't want her story to be untold, so this episode is in her memory. But before we begin, some students would like to say a couple of words.
Dr. Perry was one of the first professors I had in college. She always had a very welcome and kind environment in any class that I would go in. And she's the reason that I'm as good as a reporter as I am now. She taught me everything I know. She taught me how to write, how to make a headline, how to make a lead. Everything I am as a reporter is because of her. And I just really appreciated her. She was always so kind. Whenever she would see me in the hallway, she would tell me that she's read my story that I wrote that week and that it was really good and to keep on going. And I just wish I could tell her thank you one more time for everything that she's done in my life.
Hi, my name is Leslie Washington, and I'm one of Dr. Perry's students, as well as an advisee, and she was a great mentor. She kept me on the right path when it came to my studies and what I needed to do for class. And she loved her chief. She was a great historian, and she will be greatly missed.
Some of my best memories of Dr. Perry is when she would walk into the office and I'd be sitting at my desk and we would talk about our days really quick, and she was always really interested in what I had to say, and she just had a big heart that everyone loved. So.
If Dr. Perry was here, one thing I would tell her is thank you for giving me the opportunities to become bigger than I thought I ever could be. She made me think bigger about my future and what I wanted in life, and I could never thank her for that because I've truly changed for the rest of my life and my career.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. I want to thank you for being one of the people who believed in me before I ever believed in myself. You read every story I ever wrote. You came to me with comments and feedback every single time, even when I wasn't in one of your classes. You always kept up to date on me, checked in on me, and made sure that I was doing okay, and truly just, I will miss seeing your face in the hallways of Growl more than anything. I am so grateful for the times that we had, and you had such a strong impact on me. And although it seems emptier without you, we all will remember all the memories we had with you forever. We're so grateful. We love you. We miss you already. And this episode is for you.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Well, guys, welcome back to another episode of the My Story podcast. I'm your host, Ari, and I'm very excited for this story because today I have someone that I have briefly conversations with, but she's a very interesting person. She's a great human being overall, and I really want to listen to her story. So without further ado, I have Dr. Perry with me today.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Okay, so for everyone listening and viewing, what's your name? Who are you? What do you do? What's your story?
My name is Pam Perry, and I'm a professor in the mass media department. And I have been working very closely in the media field for about 40 years, which is hard for me to believe. I started out as a reporter. Then I did public relations. I owned my own PR firm.
Oh.
Then I went back up more education. And I've been teaching for almost 27 years.
Wow.
And so I love teaching. And that's what I do for a living, basically.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know you did all that. So how did you start in the media industry?
Well, I don't know why, but when I was a little kid, like 7th grade, I wanted to be a writer. And then in one of my classes, somebody came and said, most writers can't make a living if you're talking about novelists. Yeah. Like a lot of people who write books actually have jobs. And
Yeah.
I thought, well, that just won't do. I have to make money. So then I began looking at it, and I saw journalism. And I always got encouragement from my teachers that I could write really well. So I worked on my high school newspaper. I wrote a little bit for the place where I grew up. I grew up in Rolla, Missouri.
Okay.
And I worked for the Rolla Daily News, not as a reporter, but I did like little freelance stories for about things at the high school.
Okay.
And then I got my degree and became a reporter. And I never really wanted to do anything else except maybe play third base for the Cardinals. But they weren't looking at me. I wasn't draft material. So, but in terms of realistic things I could do, I just always wanted to be a reporter.
Okay, so you went into journalism. How did you match that with PR then? Because you mentioned you're a business owner?
I did own my own PR firm for a few years.
Okay.
Part of it is I'm in my early 60s.
Okay.
So a lot of public relations people of my generation got their start in journalism first.
Okay.
You became a reporter, you did that for a while, and then some people stayed in the field, and then some people migrated to PR. Because journalism and PR are kind of like first cousins.
Yeah.
And so I took my journalistic knowledge and I became really a media relations specialist in the field of PR. Almost all the PR I did was media relations. And so I'd been a journalist for a while and had some really cool jobs. The best job I had was I was congressional correspondent for Baptist News Service, which is a wire service.
Yeah.
And I worked in Washington, D.C. from 1991 to 1996. My boss covered the Supreme Court and the White House. But when he wasn't available, which I hoped he wasn't a lot, didn't mean anything happened to him. He just wasn't available.
Yeah.
I got to go to the Supreme Court and I got to go to the White House and cover stories. And so covering Washington was my last, if my memory is correct, my last full-time journalism job.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to work for a trade association in Washington, D.C., doing their publications. But I had worked for a couple of small newspapers before I went to D.C.
Okay. Can you, because I've heard of a couple of students mention your time covering White House and what you just mentioned. Can you share a couple of stories of your experience as a journalist working in a very tough space?
The one thing I really regret is I had several friends say, you should be keeping a journal. I'm like, I'll never forget this stuff. Well, guess what you do? It's been a long time, but...
Keep a journal. Always keep a journal.
Keep some kind of notes. But I do have a few stories I'll share.
Okay.
One of the neatest things I got to do is that Thurgood Marshall is arguably one of the most important Supreme Court justices we've ever had. First black man to be appointed to the Supreme Court. He was the attorney who, I believe he argued Brown versus Board of Education. Then he came on the Supreme Court. Well, I got to cover his retirement. So when he announced his retirement from the court, I was there. And what's really cool, and this is probably not of interest to anybody else but me, there's a movie about Justice Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, where Anita Hill challenges Justice Thomas. And a clip from that retirement is in the movie, and for 1 second you can see me in the movie.
Really?
You probably wouldn't recognize me because that was during I wore a perm phase. But because I knew I was in the room.
I was not expecting that. Sorry.
Well, it was a long time ago, and I don't wear perms anymore.
Oh,
but
wow.
I recognize me in it, but it's just for a second.
Okay.
But it was not lost on me the importance of who he was and being there. Then once he retired, I got to cover the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings. And that's probably the most remarkable thing I've ever covered in terms of just its impact on the country, not knowing who was telling the truth, just covering that was, I had never covered anything like that before or since.
Wow.
And so that was really neat. And then I got to do things like when the president gave the State of the Union address, I got to cover that. So I was sitting in the Congressional Press Gallery when Bush gave a State of the Union, and then when Clinton was. I covered the end of Bush's term and the beginning of Clinton's. I also covered Clinton's inauguration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
As a journalist, how did you deal with the pressure that did you feel any pressure like writing those stories, covering them, and meeting deadlines within that specific?
I have to tell you, I'd be lying if I told you not. Okay, so when I went from covering religious stories, I worked at some religious newspapers, to going to be a congressional correspondent, covering my beat was the First Amendment, which how cool is that?
Yeah.
So I covered the religious clauses of the First Amendment. So like school prayer, vouchers, things like that, free speech. And I didn't know much about Congress. So that freaked me out. I learned really quickly. And so you can learn a new beat. That one's got a lot of pressure to it because you don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
So I just had to read everything I could, read as many newspapers as I could. And on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, I would go over to the Congressional Press Gallery, see what was going on.
Yeah.
They published something called the Congressional Record, so you would get it. It's daily recordings of what happened. And so I had to teach myself. So one thing I would say is when you're on a new beat, because it's not the only new beat I took, you just need to, in your mind, convince yourself you belong there until you actually do. And I don't mean be a poser. I believe if you don't know stuff, you ask people, teach me. I've never stopped learning. I saw something, I'm getting a little far afield, but I saw something on,
please keep doing.
on Facebook the other day.
Yeah.
It was like a meme, and it said, education is something you can never complete. I can't remember who they were quoting, so that's not for me. It's somebody from Facebook. But I think that's how I've lived my life. I hope that's how my students live their life. I'm never not learning the next thing. And then I got somewhat confident that I was doing well. But my deadlines are usually at noon every day.
Okay.
So I would write however many stories I had due. They'd be turned in at noon. They'd be edited. They'd be sent to the wire service. And then they would be distributed across the country. And then the next afternoon, I would start doing my research. And so the biggest thing was one story I can do in the morning, but if I have 3 or 4, that's a real challenge.
Okay.
And so it depended on how much I had to do. But I loved it. And one of the things I've been fortunate to be gifted with, I'm not the best writer you ever read, but I am a fast writer.
Okay.
So one of my friends one time, we actually shared a house together when I lived in the area, very expensive. And she goes, it sounds like you're typing, like you're reading something and typing. I said, no, I'm writing. That's me writing. And so I've never timed myself. And I'm not as fast as I used to be because I'm not a reporter anymore, but I could write very fast.
Wow. So I was actually going to ask you about that. Like, did you have any advice specifically for young reporters who are learning how to maybe timestamp their stories and putting them on time, and how to schedule like their stories, which write first, which write after, if you have two at the same time you have to write? How did you manage that?
Well, it just kind of depends. Writing is a mood thing too.
Okay.
Like grading could be like that. Which stack of papers do I grade? But it would depend. Like if sometimes I would have like a big story, maybe 2 little stories, and so sometimes I'd knock out the little ones because like boom, 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 and then pay attention. Or it just depended on my mood that day. Sometimes I'd attack the big one because I knew once it was done, then the other 2 were going to be easier. I will say that whatever helps you make the deadline, because journalism is not very flexible. I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that here at SEMO. But we were taught that one of the definitions of journalism is the best you can do by deadline. So those 3 stories have to be written one way or the other. So whatever helps you, I think it's kind of personal.
Okay. So, what besides all the journalism aspects of your life, what are some other stories you would like to share, or maybe some hardships that have made you form this strong mentality of just let's do this?
Well, I grew up in a family that really believed in hard work. I had great parents, and I have 4 just amazing siblings. But one of the things a family kind of stood for was hard work, that you have to do the very best you can do at everything that you can. That doesn't mean you're trying to beat everybody. It doesn't mean that you are the best, because that creates, I think, a bad person who wants to compete with everybody.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing my best at every task, then some of it's going to turn out okay. And so I always tried to work really hard. I never, a lot of professors that when they were younger and they went to school, they were the smartest person in the room.
Okay.
I was never that. I was never the smartest person in the room. Now, I'm smart enough, okay? But I could always outwork almost anybody. And so that was kind of my thing.
Okay.
Smart enough to learn, smart enough to pick it up, but if I work harder than you, my product might actually be better. It just depends. And so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but mid-career is when I decided to go into teaching and go back and get more education, because I thought, what is more fun than being a reporter or a PR practitioner? And that might be helping other people become one. And so I really love what I do, because I can see different students and what they bring to the table, and I can almost imagine their future. And I have a small part in that, and that makes me just as happy as when I was a reporter. Those were very good days. But all of that is hard. I don't mean to make it sound easy. So I would think, I don't know if this was a hardship, but there were 5 kids in my family. So one thing we had to do is I had to pay for my own education. So one of my friends who is not a teacher said one time, she said, "You seem to have a rapport with your students." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because I never forgot what it was like to be one. Never. And I haven't been to school since 1985. I mean, as an undergrad."
Yeah.
And so I think having to work to pay to get my own education was hard. For a little while when I was in school, this is the truth, I would go give my plasma to get money to help buy my groceries.
Wow.
Now, I stopped doing that because that wasn't healthy. I just decided, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so, having to do that. And then as a young reporter starting out, I didn't make much money.
Yeah.
So I was, when I went into teaching, I actually got a raise, which is kind of a joke because, teachers aren't supposed to be paid that well. Well, paid better than I was when I was a reporter.
Wow.
Now, I do think today it's a little better.
Okay.
I think, again, I graduated in 1985, and that's when I started working as a professional. So that's almost 40 years.
Yeah.
So I think the profession is better now. I don't know. I'm sure I've had other struggles. None of them are really coming to my mind. But hard work is. I had a friend one time. We're both in our 60s. She had a long day one day, and she was talking about how hard her job was. And I said, well, that's why they call it work. They don't call it fun. And so working hard, I had to work pretty hard to get where I got. But I don't know. I think that's good.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. And especially, I love the part, this was a little back of what you said, how you said you weren't necessarily the smartest in the room, but you worked hard enough to maybe be that person in a way, because it's sad that some people are just, oh yeah, I'm the smartest people in the room, just go and lay back. And no, even if you
they don't always live up to their potential.
Yes, because it's okay to be the smartest in the room, but you still have to work hard. You still have to give it your all. So I love that you said that you still worked hard and persevered through all that.
Well, I actually think that I maximized the potential of what I could do. So I didn't squander any of it. And it's also okay to say you're not the smartest person in the room. I don't need to be that. It's not about that. It's about journalism and media, and the things that we do is about helping advance society. It's not about, do I have the best resume? Do we have time for me to share you something else?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So when I became a professor, I really just wanted to be a teacher. So but at some point when I was teaching, I was working at another university, and they asked me to go back and get my PhD. So I did, and I did it as kind of an older person. So that would definitely be struggles. I turned 50, 51, something like that when I graduated.
Okay.
And so, but one of the things that did for me is it helped me become a media historian. And what I love about it is that in addition to teaching here, I do a lot of writing about media history, and it connects my first love of journalism with my love of history. And so now what I used to do as a reporter, I'm doing long form in history books.
Wow.
So I've written a book on Dwight Eisenhower that was published in 2014, and I'm working on one now that I have no idea when will be published. I hope in 2 years. And I'm editing a book series on women in American political history. So in some ways, my original love of journalism informs or is a part of me being a professor. And I think that's cool.
That is cool because what you lived and what you learned are very combined right now. So do you use that, everything you experience? I assume I do, but I haven't taken your classes. Sure. But I assume you do. How do you pass that on to your students? Because you just mentioned you love helping others and forming future journalists.
One of the reasons professors do research is to bring that into the classroom. Yeah. And you can't bring everything you do, but for instance, I do teach media history, and one of the first discussions we have is about what is history and what do we do and what do historians do. And history is basically a pursuit of the truth based on evidence. That sounds a lot like journalism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so I will talk to them about the book that I wrote and how hard it is to find the truth and to know what sources to rely on and things like that. And when I teach PR writing class, sometimes I talked about how to start a PR firm because I had what's called a sole practitionership, or I was my company.
Okay. Yeah.
But what I did was I did have real clients, and I had contracts, and I had tax obligations, and my parents were afraid that I was unemployed, and I'm like, no, I have like all these clients. I'm making all this money. The first year I did it, I was actually making more money than I'd ever made working for somebody else.
Wow.
So I did that for like 3 years, and then I went into teaching.
Okay. How did you decide to go into teaching? You talked about it a bit, but if you can
Well, my father was a professor.
Okay.
My father taught engineering at the University of Missouri, Rolla, which is now S&T or something like that. ST&T. I can't get used to the new name.
Okay.
But he taught engineering for almost 40 years.
Wow.
And my sister teaches 5th grade math or 7th grade math. And my brother was going to be a teacher, and then he became a pastor. So he kind of teaches in a different way. So teaching's kind of in the family. And I just, had been around it my whole life. And then I knew that it's not uncommon, really, for some reporters who don't want to make deadlines till they're 65 or 70 to go into teaching. And so I just got a master's degree, started teaching part-time. My first teaching job was at American University in Washington because I was working there. And so, but I was an adjunct. I taught like one course at a time.
Okay.
And then I was an adjunct at George Washington University. They had an adult certificate program.
Okay.
So I taught like one course for them. And then over time, I got a full-time tenure-track teaching gig. But it just kind of was in the family blood a little bit.
Okay, that's interesting. But to see that even though it was in the family, you still are very passionate about it. And it was beautiful to hear. So I really wanted to know, how did you decide to go into that? So we're sadly running out of time. But any advice you would love to give your students potentially watching this or anyone in general regarding their profession or life or anything you want to share with them?
The best advice I have for my students is that you are amazing. Okay? And don't let anybody tell you that you're not. I am so tired of hearing about how your generation is going to let us down. Guess what? You are going to be the generation that saves us. And you can do anything that you can dream, so I hope you dream big. I think the only thing that keeps you from achieving the top thing is sometimes not believing that you can do it. You can and you should.
I don't know how to end an episode in a more perfect way. That was great advice. I actually gonna take that to heart. Thank you so much for being here. It was amazing to listen to your story. And well, guys, see you guys in the next one.
Thanks for having me.